So good morning and welcome to the Commons Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club. This is our February show for 2025, even though it's March right now. And we've got a really, really fantastic book for you. It's a piece of memoir. It's about trauma. It's about life and healing and getting better. And it's just a very smart, fantastic book that really touched all of us in the store quite a lot. The book is The Murder Next Door, and I'm very, very pleased to have our author, HUGH D'ANDRADE here. You know, I did it off camera. I was great with you. HUGH D'ANDRADE. Yeah. And we've got a live studio audience, as you can hear as well. So that this is fun. This is we haven't done one of these in a while. Thank you for coming and being willing to talk to us.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So my first question, it's always the same, and I kind of think it gets to what we do here at Comics Experience and with the club, and it is thus: why comics? Of all the ways you could express yourself, what is it about comics that speaks to you, that talks to you? Because comics are not an easy art form to do. It's a solitary art form, and you generally don't make any money doing it. Generally,
yeah.
So why?
Yeah. I know it's a really good question. I mean, for me, I might even frame it, why not? I think I have been a reader and fan of comics and graphic novels since childhood. And then, I was coming of age in my 20s in the 1990s, which was a just incredible time for graphic novels and comics. There was so much amazing literature being produced, and I would read it with relish and this kind of jealousy that I couldn't do it, because it was too hard. I mean, I couldn't quite put my finger on, like, why is it so hard? Why somehow I can't do that? I did do actually a couple of 2-page comics, In fact, the first thing I had published was a 2-page comic in a radical magazine called Processed World.
Okay.
That used to be a sort of an institution here in San Francisco, kind of a radical magazine geared towards what would be the tech workers of the time. Yeah, and I did that was the first thing I ever got published, and it was so hard to do 2 pages that I was sort of traumatized and never did it again. But I think, and I've had a career, 30 years of being an illustrator, graphic artist, a various graphic designer, graphic artist, and not doing them, and sort of wondering why I wasn't.
Yeah.
So it was the pandemic, the experience of being at home for months on end,
right,
with my thoughts, looking at my life, going, why am I not doing a graphic novel?
Yeah.
That made me finally do it.
Yeah. So you, just so I'm clear, you went straight from doing just those 2 pages to doing a big old book? Was there steps in the middle?
The longest, I had done several 2-page comics before doing this.
Okay.
Yep.
But 2 pages was the most you had ever done?
The most I had ever done. Yeah. And I realized, I could tell you part of the reason for that is ADHD, I tend to, one thing about having an ADHD mind, you tend to look at a problem all at once and see this like bird's eye view of the whole problem.
Sure.
And I don't tend to break it down into constituent parts and then do them in a logical order like a normal person would, and so a graphic novel seemed always, and so my solution for that is always to dive in with the deep focus mind. The ADHD has a hyperfocus mode, and so all my art was always done in hyperfocus mode.
Yeah.
When you can't do a graphic novel in hyperfocus mode, it's not possible.
Right.
So I was always limited to those 2 pages. But once I knew I had that brain type, then I could read some books about how to address it.
Yeah. It's a big jump to go from 2 pages to, what do we got here? 140 or so? 160? Yeah. What was that like, to suddenly have this giant canvas in front of you?
Well, what was a challenge was figuring out how to write and draw at the same time. I've always been a writer and an artist, so it seemed like, it should be easy to combine the 2 things, but they are 2 maybe different hemispheres or 2 different brain types, 2 ways of thinking, and it was hard to combine them. And I had read that many artists, like I'm a huge fan of Adrian Tomina, and I read everything he does and everything he says about his work, and I knew that he's like, I write a screenplay. He writes a screenplay like you would like a movie, you know. And then I had also seen the incredible scripts that Watchmen, who's the author,
Alan Moore.
Yeah, Alan Moore does for his panel by panel.
Yeah,
just describes each panel.
Yeah.
12 panels per page.
Yeah,
each panel has a description.
Yeah,
and I thought,
and sometimes for like 3 or 4 paragraphs.
Yes.
For one panel.
For one little panel. And I thought, oh, is that how you do it? You know, and I tried to do that. Well, that didn't work. Yeah, I had to find a way. I had to find a way to do it.
Yeah.
And eventually I realized that my way of doing it was to take a page of just notes that if anybody here was to read it, it would look like gibberish. This looks like just gibberish. Throw this away. Recycle that, you know. But this is my precious notes for my graphic novel. And then I could take 1 page of notes and turn it into 5 pages of paneled comics.
Yeah.
That's how I do it.
Yeah. Did you thumbnails first?
Of course.
Yeah. Okay.
Of course.
Yeah.
Little crappy thumbnails that, again, nobody else could read.
Yeah.
Just like you would. I should have saved some of them. They would amuse me because I could see clearly what's happening there, and I'm certain nobody else could ever decode them. And then I took those thumbnails, turned those into penciled pages. I always work. You know how I was lucky that I have a method that I have learned from my illustration work, which is I never draw in sketchbooks. The sketchbook, I'm always aware. Oh, I'm just going to stay around forever, and I'm going to value there's going to be a thing of value.
Right.
I feel the weight of maybe at least my future self looking back and judging. And so I work on just Xerox paper. I buy reams of the Xerox crap paper, and then I throw away anything that doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so I just penciled all my things on that size paper and went from there.
Yeah. Did you? This is actually going a little ahead of where I was going to go with this originally. But did you have a home for the book when you started doing this,
No.
or? Wow. So you were just doing this completely on spec.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. But I was in part because of this, realizing I've got to overcome this ADHD challenge. The other thing I didn't mention was that I thought sitting there during the pandemic at home for months on end, I should get my master's degree. And maybe I've always wanted, it's always bothered me I didn't have a master's degree. It's this stupid, shallow, like feather in your cap reason. It's just, why don't I have a master's degree? And I wanted to do comics, so I thought I could put those two things together. And there are a couple of master's degree, low residency programs. There's one in Vermont, and I forget the name of it. But then there's one here locally at my alma mater, where friends of mine teach, a place where I myself taught at times. And I thought, let's just sign up there. So I did. And they gave me a lot of help, a lot of breakdown of different systems.
Yeah, and this was all virtual as well.
It was the first year was all on Zoom.
Yeah.
I didn't see anybody in person. Yeah, unless we were all super masked up. Everybody's super paranoid. Yeah. All your professors are like, I cannot, everybody's got people in their lives who are immune compromised, and it was a tough time. But that gave me a lot of support. When it was great, and I got a lot of feedback from other people, and produced as part of that program 2 chapters and an outline, and then I had something that I could shop around, and Street Noise liked it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Did you have an agent do that part yet?
Yeah. It was funny. Like, in fact, I had found Street Noise and made a connection with them and knew that they liked my book. And then I said, "Oh, but hold on! I just also met an agent." And I found an agent, and then he shopped it around, and we ended up back with Street Noise. Yeah.
Did you have multiple people making offers, or?
Yeah,
nice.
a few, but Street Noise was the best that we found. I mean, their books are so beautifully produced. So it's not like Fantagraphics level in terms of their reach and certainly their budget. Yeah. But one thing, I loved the selection of books that they produced. The other authors that I was in a category with is wonderful, and then the actual production value is very high. Yeah.
No, very much so. And it's a nice looking book too. I mean, it came out physically very, very nice. I love it.
They let me do a gatefold. Yeah. I had to talk them into it.
Yeah, no, that's good. Okay, so you said that you read comics when you were younger. What's the first comic that you read that like stuck with you? Tintin. Not the first thing that you read, right? But
totally.
Like
the one Tintin.
Tintin. Sure. Okay.
Tintin.
Yeah.
I loved those. And I didn't ever really, there were times when I was reading Spider-Man, but I was never one of those kids that knew all the Spider-Man. Oh, I'm
Right.
superheroes. But Tintin, I love that, and Asterix and Obelix and Asterix. Those had a profound effect on me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when I was in high school, I also discovered Crumb. Yeah, I was reading Crumb.
Yeah. And you're talking.
So I have trauma from that.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah,
I bet. You're also talking about three artists who, are very precise, very detailed, very specific kind of styles, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Masters. Those are all masters of the medium. They make it look so easy.
Yeah.
But the one wonderful thing about that is you open a page of a Tintin book and you're off to the races. You guys have read Tintin? I mean, those are incredible books. Yeah. They have problematic now to us with our modern eyes. We can read them and go, oh, that's some BS.
Right.
But they are so engaging.
Yeah. And
you fall right into them. And it's interesting to me that that's right at the beginning of the history of comics literature. It's all there. Or Little Nemo is another one. And you're like the actual founding of the whole genre and its incredible masterpieces. Yeah, that everybody's kind of trying to catch up to from then on.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's one of the incredible things about comics, and just, again, we're talking about things that are all very different from one another, that were produced under very different conditions in very different ways, and they're all, other art forms, other media tend to get kind of narrowed into like kind of boxes, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Like, to me, comics are fantastic in that there's no one way to do it. There's not, right? Like, you can do it any old way you want to. I mean, there are definitely people who do comics literally on Xerox paper and just fold them up, and that's how they do their comics. And there's other people who, are meticulous about.
Some are wordless.
Yep.
Some have all words with a few pictures. And it's even hard to come up with a definition, a working definition. Although you know it when you see it, it's like pornography. Yeah. So it's great.
Yeah. So did you do a screenplay like Adrian suggested, or no?
I would do a page of notes. Yeah.
Okay.
And the notes would be a description of things, beats I would want to hit. I think of it as comics as beats, And so I go, I want to hit this beat where my character says this, and I want to have this beat where it looks like this. And I knew I want to have several pages that are a full page with this giant looming monster murderer, So that's how we did it.
There's a number of chapters in here. You got 9, 10 chapters, something like that. Did you structure the story out that way, or did that just come? Okay,
that I did. So I knew I did the second chapter first, and then I thought, well, I should just do 10 chapters and see how many pages that'll come to. And I scripted that out. So I had an outline. I knew what the subject of each chapter was going to be. Yeah. So in that sense, I had an outline, but it was not an outline, conventional outline.
No, I understand.
And a little hard to shop it around too, because my notes for chapters I had not yet penciled were rather rough.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But once you had 2 chapters done, I mean, that's all really any publisher needs to see at that point. Like, you can sustain a story. You can do the thing.
Yep.
Did that make it easier for you to sort of wrap your hands around the story and doing it in 10 chapters, so they're each, let's say, 16 to 20 pages, and so it wasn't like you had to do 160 pages all at once. You had to do 16 pages at a time.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, like I said, it's not my normal way of thinking to break a project down into its constituent parts and then do them in a linear fashion. But I have learned that works. So it's a thing that you have to do with ADHD mind. You have to look at the linear thinkers and go, oh, I'm going to have to learn from them. Yeah. They should do the same with us. They should be like, why am I not creative enough? How can I be more like Hugh?
One of the things I really appreciated about the book was how honest you were about your own fears and about the trauma that you went through. And that's not something that you generally see in memoirs of comics, at least not from male authors, right? There's plenty of examples of trauma in comics, like personal trauma, but it's almost always women talking about it, right? Men tend to talk about incidents, right? Like when I think about most of the memoirs from men in comics, they tend to be like, well, like Adrian, right?
Yeah.
Right. Or Joe Matt,
Mm.
Joe Matt spends a lot of time talking about his masturbation habits,
Right.
Even Crumb, it's like,
Yeah.
here's a very specific part of it, but it's not kind of dealing with the underlying trauma.
Well, they're very honest too,
Mhm.
though. They're not afraid to make themselves look bad.
Yeah.
And that is definitely, there's some weird thing about comic artists and self-loathing.
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed. I don't know what
Mhm.
that is about,
Mhm.
but you've got maybe some of the giants are these self-loathing individuals, the Crumbs and the Joe
Mhm.
Matt. Joe Matt died during my production of this, and I went back and looked at him, having kind of gotten pretty bored of him and his masturbation stories years ago in the 90s.
Yeah.
Like I was like, kind of put this aside and like, I don't need to read another of these books by this guy. And then he died, and I thought, oh, I should go back. Well, I'm working on a graphic novel. I should go and look at Joe Matt. And I'm like, this guy's amazing. He was an amazing artist, an amazing cartoonist. I had no idea until I myself tried to do cartooning and tried to reinvent my illustration style in a cartooning way, which is a whole other thing. But I think those guys are all very honest. But it is true that my inspiration was people like Marjane Sartrapi, and also my mentor at CCA, T. Bowie, her book, The Best We Could Do, folks like that.
Was it hard to sort of plumb the depths of your own brain on this?
No.
Okay.
No, because I do that all the time anyway.
Yeah.
I mostly like walk around doing this in my head. So this was like, to do the comic felt great because it's like, oh, I spill out all the stuff that my brain is ruminating on. Like I think I have a brain that ruminates. Like I'm just a little cycle, the same thing over and over again. You know what I mean? And then my art has always been a way to put that out on the page. But I think I had reached the point in my career where I was like, oh, it's not really enough for me to make a single image. And in the comics, just what a relief. It's like letting it out. Yeah, it felt great.
Yeah. And do you find that you're ruminating about it less?
About the murder less.
Yeah.
In fact, so one of my jokes, I apologize to my friends who have all heard me say this, that my friends that are in the room, they heard me say this, that this book was a process for me of turning my trauma into boredom. Because there's just so much tedium involved. I'm just sitting there like, oh my God, do I have to like, where am I going to put the red? When it's a red dot, which the first time I did it and put a little red dot for a blood drip, I'm like, was re-traumatizing myself. By the time I'm done, I'm like, let's make it white instead of red. Like I'm just like, it's a technical problem. And that was great. Yeah, very healing. I recommend it for anybody with trauma. You should do a comic.
Yeah, I just, to me, the question is kind of just the amount of time that it takes to do comics, right, means that you're really living with it, like in a really intense way. And particularly, as you said, you were doing this during lockdown. So you didn't have anything else going on. Well, you might have had other things going on, but right, like your focus was on this. That is that's a pretty big challenge, I think.
Yeah, it was. There, especially the scene where my character encountered the body. Was really, really hard. I actually left it to last. So I did that long after we were out of lockdown. And it was very painful to face and sit there ruminating in it day after day. It was really hard. And then, what else was hard was it was hard for me to give it off to my friends who were children when we were 10, we were kids together. They're now middle-aged men like me. And it was hard to draw this knowing I was going to have to give it to them. Really anxious that I was re-traumatizing them. The last thing I want to do, but I still need to do this book. So
what was the reaction?
Well, one brother was very talkative. The other brother was not. He just didn't seem particularly interested. He was like, oh, this is great. Congratulations. Good luck. Please go ahead. You have my blessing, but not interested in engaging.
But they didn't have any issue with you talking about the events. Okay.
No, but they did want to see the draft.
They
wanted to see the draft. They asked me to change the names.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, just a crazy life world we live in where, it's like there's a risk, that very, very tiny risk that my book might become a hit, right? And then somebody might come stalking them and harassing them for being victims of a murder. It's like that's the craziest thing that we have to worry about, that they have to protect themselves, but that's the world that we live in.
Yeah, it sure is.
Yeah.
You're, I don't know, therapist or psychiatrist. I don't remember which it is.
It's a therapist. Yeah.
Therapist
He wasn't able to give me any drugs. That's how you know. I learned this after I started seeing him, that he couldn't give me drugs. I was very disappointed.
Yeah.
He's like, no, I don't have that kind of degree. What are you talking about?
But he's a pretty significant character in the story. Were you seeing him still? Are you still seeing him while you're producing the book at all?
No, okay. I mean, only to say, hey, I'm doing this book. And, one of there were sort of two things he was always working with me about. Was like, one was overcoming my trauma. The other was, when are you going to do your book? Mm-hmm. So it was pretty cool. I had ceased work with him around 2018. And then I pop up years later. I'm like, hey, I did my book. Your character.
What was his reaction?
Very positive.
Yeah.
Yeah, very positive.
Yeah. Did you give him a draft as well?
I gave him a draft, and then I showed him the final. I thought if he had anything he wanted to change or anything, but he didn't. He just said, oh, that guy sounds like a pretty good therapist. Yeah.
No, I mean, that was definitely the impression I got as well. I mean, he came off very well in the book,
good,
in the way that he was trying to help you.
And then I totally messed up. I forgot to put his name in the thanks. But yeah, he was a really good therapist. His name's Mark Fromm. If anybody wants to go see him, look him up. Yeah, he was a very good therapist. And in fact, my partner, Wendy, who's right here, is a therapist. And when we met, I said, oh, you went to school where my therapist teaches. He said, also, he was my mentor or advisor.
Interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
It's a small world.
Yeah, and he was a good therapist. And then there were also times with him it was hard, and I fired him a couple of times. It was like, you're out. I'm stormed out of sessions. It was like, forget you. Yeah. So he's not perfect. Yeah. I don't think there's a thing. I think that's an important thing that your therapist should. I liked him a lot too. He was also a friend. Yeah. And I miss him as a friend. And I think that's an important thing with your therapist, that you don't really want them to be your friend, but you want to have a personal connection. Sure. And if you see somebody for 15 years, I saw him for 15 years. Yeah. You will develop a really deep bond. Yeah. I think it's important. And I put that in the book. We would make each other laugh. Yeah. Yeah. He was always like, the other thing was he was like, stand up. He thought I should do stand up. I'm like, no, I'll do author interviews, but I'm not going to do stand up.
It's kind of the other place where the creative process is filled with self-loathing as well.
Exactly. Right? Exactly. Yeah. People love to witness your self-loathing. Yeah. So
well, because we all have it and we all feel it, and when we don't know how to express it necessarily, right. So seeing that other people are feeling the same things that are in the as they say, the long dark tea time of your soul. Yeah. It's helpful. It
helps you to see another person, go through the same things you're going through.
Yeah. No, and I mean, and that was one of the things that I think that we all took from this book was the honesty that was on display about that trauma, and really putting ourselves in your shoes and feeling that as well. And it, I personally don't have any trauma that's specific like this, but it made me think about things in my own life, and experiences that I have. And so, it's kind of brave what you did.
Thank you. Thank you. And well, I'm glad if it brings that out of you, it resonates with you that way. That's what I was hoping would happen, is that, because I feel like there's a part of the book where my therapist sort of awkwardly brings up this story about, Holocaust survivors, and how one Holocaust survivor feels he can never discuss his trauma because he's aware that there's somebody else who had it even worse, and that's a real thing that all of us are going through, carrying our own pain, knowing that somebody else has it worse. Yeah. It doesn't mean that your own pain doesn't need to be witnessed or shared or something, or processed. I don't know what you're supposed to do with it. Get it out. Give it to somebody else to hold.
Well, I think it's one of the fantastic things about comics is that it can really put you in another person's shoes in a way that feels very personal. You mentioned Marjane Satrapi before, and that was one of the first books that I read that I walked into that book not knowing anything about that part of the country, how people's lives were, and I walked out of it feeling like I actually had felt that part of those experiences, and that I've never there's a distancing that I get from like film. Right? People make films about similar subjects, but it always seems so at arm's length.
Yeah.
Whereas this is not arm's length. Comics are not arm's length. Comics are very, and I think part of it is because the audience is a participant in comics, right? Without the audience, there is no comics in a way, right? Because you're showing an image and you're showing a different image, and the audience has to make the jump between 1 and 2 and figure out what's going on there, right?
Yes.
And so it's so participatory in that way that other media don't do.
There's also this idea, I can't remember where I encountered this idea, so I'm borrowing somebody else's idea, is that comics are sort of situated in an interesting in-between point between literature, textual literature, and cinema, and kind of combines the best of both in the sense that, you know, with a movie, you go see a film and you get the visual depiction of the world as you know it to be, and it resonates with you on that level, but you do not get the interior dialogue or the description that you get from reading a book, from reading a book of text literature. And comics has this ability to kind of do both those things. At the same time, it's like it is also a thing that an individual can do still. So it has this way of being potentially more punk rock than I think cinema can be. Where it's just any work of cinema, even the smallest movie with a tiny $5 million budget, still has a $5 million budget, you know, and it's thousands of people collaborating on it, enormous pressures and concessions. Where a comic, you're looking at, it's pretty much one person's brain spilled on the page. And that's a great thing. Really is a great thing. So I'm really pleased that, look at this book. You're in this store and there's like, I'm looking at this incredible diversity of different types of imagery. It's a little triggering for my ADHD, but
hopefully in a good way.
In a good way.
You know, like that you're in a pantheon, right? Like
there's a little part of my brain that's like, wait, what is the rest of Scott Pilgrim's books? Do I need to read those?
I hear you. Let's talk maybe about the physical production of the book. How long did it take you to get this done?
About 3 years.
3 years. Okay.
Yeah, 3 years. And maybe I'm hopeful that my next book might go a little faster. So, like I said, I draw on the Xerox paper. You know, I have a grid, a very simple grid that I print onto it so that I can at least get my panels sort of close to the regular size, and I just sketch on those. Then I have a technique. You know how a lot of people use that blue pencil? You see examples of the people they draw comics, they draw a blue pencil and then they ink over top of it. I hate those blue pencils. I can't do that. So I take my pencil sketch that's like small, and I had developed this technique from my illustration work where I found that my sketches had this energy, and I was always like, how do I maintain that energy, that sort of authenticity when I go larger for my final? And oftentimes there was something lost in the translation from small to big. So in my illustration work, I take even sometimes a tiny thumbnail and I print it in light blue ink onto Bristol paper and draw directly on that.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So I just applied that technique to doing comics.
Interesting.
Yeah. So instead of blue pencil, it's blue ink of a scan of a pencil sketch. And then there's often a lot of transformation in that ink state that's very different from the pencil. Yeah. Well,
because that the thumbnails are all about gesture. About immediacy. And when you start inking, then you have to start getting into the details and a lot of like little just, you know. Yeah,
and a lot of times you're like, oh, that is completely has no like, oh, that body would not work. Although that's a great thing about comics, you can really draw ridiculous figures where like with a giant hand or bendy arms. I love bendy arms. It saves my life. Yeah. I always like my characters to be made out of rubber. Yeah. Their bones are kind of rubbery.
Yeah. Well, that's the beauty of the cartooning part of it, right?
That's the cartooning part. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely artists, I don't know, say a Barry Windsor Smith something, who's very, very, very accurate to reality. And then there's cartooning. You know.
And most of us do the more stretchy, cartoony thing. You know, can I make one observation about that I've always noticed this thing with comics, that there's a way that they simplify reality. I don't know. I see. I'm not going to be able to explain it. So you continue with another question, and it'll cycle back into my brain.
No, I mean, I think that's pretty accurate.
Yeah.
Though, right? That you're trying to. I think of comics, and I don't make comics, right? I just think about them a lot and talk about them. But I think about comics as a way of it's like editing, right? Like you're not gonna. Most people aren't gonna draw a car exactly the way that a car exactly looks, because
no, and if you did, it wouldn't work. That's what I was about to say. Yeah, that so like sometimes when somebody comes to comics and they want to make, they don't really draw that well, or they're really challenged by it, they'll think, I know what I'll do. I'll photograph things,
right,
and then I will trace those photos.
Sure.
And there are comics that are made this way.
Yep.
There's a really interesting book by the people that create This American Life, the podcast, and it's a fantastic book explaining how they break down stories and pitch them, and in the process of pitching the story, they discover the core. Just boil it down to the very heart of the thing of why somebody should care about this totally obscure thing that you want to do a podcast about, and then build back from that. Boil it down to its essence, and so I've forgotten the name of the book, but you can find it. It's a great book. But the process of they've made to create it is a comic format in which it's traced photos, and digitally done type. And it looks terrible. I would never have read this book, except I was assigned to read it in school.
Right.
And then I was like, okay, I'll read that. And it was actually really informative, but it looks like shit, personally. To my way of thinking, it doesn't look like what comics should look like, because it's too photographic. And a thing I learned from T. Bowie was the way she put it, she would study her pictures and then set them aside. And then, and because she had lots of photo reference to describe the Vietnamese refugee experience. But no, don't put it aside and then ink it and draw it from memory. And it goes through a memory filter. And so I just learned from her. I did the same thing. I would study my family photos, and then I would be like, okay, put those aside and draw my parents from memory. And it comes out more authentic and more true, more real. So there's something about that has to go through that memory filter. And then, Seth, the great comic artist, Seth, there's a documentary about him. And he says, comics are memory machines, that what it's doing is recreating the human process of remembering things. So I think there's something to that.
Well, as I say, you're trying to get the perfect image and the next perfect image, and then there's connections between them, and that's a powerful thing. You brought it up, and I hadn't actually realized it until you brought it up, that you are working on a pretty formal grid here. You've got 3 tiers in all of the book, except when it's full page. Other than that, it's all 3 tiers all the way along.
3 tiers, yes. Mostly. No, sometimes it's a half.
But it's still 3 tiers, even if you're using. Even if you've got a big second panel. Right? It's still in 3 tiers.
It's still in the grid.
It's still in the grid.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, and
that's a result of a different trauma, which is of being a graphic designer. I see a grid everywhere I go. There's a grid. I'm looking at these books on the shelf. I'm like, how can I line them up?
Believe me, I go through that too. And it's essentially it's a 9-panel grid. I mean, just like the cover, there's 9 panels there.
And I really wanted to do that. I mean, I spent so much time looking at comics, and I was like, I want to do a 9-panel grid like my heroes before me.
Does that structure make it easier for you, or is it limiting in some circumstances?
Oh no, it's wonderful. Okay. No, because you want to be constrained. Everybody wants to be swaddled. Like we're all babies. We all want to be swaddled again, like we did when we were babies. And so it gives you a way to be constrained, some way to lock it in, give you a limit. Should be a limit to if everything's too free, then you're like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm in this like soup of my own brain. But if you break it down and then you say, I'm going to lock it into a 9-panel grid. And then you're like, damn, that's not working. I can't make it fit in those 9 panels. Okay, I got to have a good reason to do that, to break out of the grid. And then when you do, it's going to have more power. So, and then when you go from your 9-panel grid to a single panel, then you really get a big punch, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's just a formal technique that
Yeah.
many people have used.
Sure.
Yeah. But I think it feels good. It's sort of like putting on your little handcuffs,
Yeah.
you know, or like that, you know, that artist Matthew Barney.
Yeah.
If you're ever at the MoMA and you're on the walkway, there's these weird marks on the wall, and you're like, that's weird. Why didn't they clean that up? That was left by Matthew Barney, and when he would constrain himself by tying him a little rope to himself, and then he can't quite draw because he's like can't reach because he's tied back. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound helpful to me to make it hard,
but that's sometimes you want to make it harder.
Sure. Yeah,
you want to constrain. You want to put on these handcuffs.
Yeah.
And then the creativity comes out of solving against, pushing back against those.
No. I mean, I very much see that. You know, when I think about the tradition of American comics that are largely superhero comics, right? It's all about dynamism, right?
Yeah.
Like it's all about panels that go diagonal across the page, and you know, sometimes you're like, my eye can't follow this. Whereas a book like when you're using the grids, there's no question about what comes next.
No,
right? Ever.
Yes.
Very clear what's happening in all paces. And yet, though you are in a very solid, predictable grid, you have absolutely no problems breaking your frame.
Breaking out of the frame.
Yeah. So,
well, like I said, when
the
it
television
out,
sticking out.
Well, this is a good page here. I'll show you. This was a thing we and this I got a wonderful suggestion. This is why readers are so important. So I was in my class with my fellow students at CCA, and somebody suggested this to me. I had my character had fallen off of his skateboard, and I had drawn him with his hand sort of sitting just barely outside the frame. And in the next picture, I had myself with my friends watching TV, but I had myself sitting in a cross-legged fashion. And they said, you know, it would really resonate if you had your character in the same position.
Yeah.
With his hands just exactly mimicking that same thing. And I'm like, of course, you're right. You're a genius. You should, but like, I'm going to take that idea and I will get credit for it, you know? But I love that when you do break out of the panel, your eye. So yeah. And that was by having the hand outside the panel and those two, it makes you remember my older self is my younger self. So to tie those two guys together,
100%,
because they look pretty different. I must say, I used to have all his hair.
Yeah. I was going to ask something. Oh, I know. In terms of as you're working and doing your thumbnails and sort of laying out your page, are you looking at it a page at a time purely, or are you going, these two pages are next to each other, so I need to have not continuity, but visual continuity, I guess, between the two pages?
I do both, but you have to do both.
Yeah.
The page needs to stand on its own, and then you always need to remember it's on a spread. And then, you know, that is another thing that comics have over any other form of literature is you get to use the page turn. I mean, maybe poetry has that. Sometimes poetry is written in a sense to lay on the page in a particular way and break the stanzas exactly how they're supposed to be broken. But any other book that you get that's literature, you know, it's one long scroll and it doesn't really matter the page turn. And as a comic artist, you get to use that. So it's like, okay, the person is going to turn the page and then boom, or there's a pause. It's a pause, you know, and so you get a rhythm to it. But then the unfortunate thing is that also they're peeking a little into the future, aren't they? Right? Because they're seeing ahead. They're going to see, you're going to have that big red frame with the evil murderer figure. They're going to see that before they read what comes before it. And I need to keep that in mind. But you do both. Yeah. Do you draw comics yourself? No,
I can't draw at all. I'm an awful artist. I've tried writing a couple of things, but I like talking about it more.
You like talking about it, but that's an art form in itself.
So I'm suited obviously to own a bookstore because I can talk about it all day and compare different things.
But I think everybody does it a little differently though too. Many people think about it differently. I mean, I know that some people some artists are panel by panel. And they're much more focused on that like little panel. And then they just assume they're going to all work together.
And then you get guys like, say, Alan Moore, who not only are thinking about the units of the page, but also how a word that closes one page can transform what you're seeing on when you flip
when you turn the page,
right? Like you look at Watchmen, it's just
change,
filled with these tense shifts or whatever.
Right.
You know, it's kind of astonishing actually that I had never even realized that could happen until I encountered in Moore's work.
Yeah.
You know,
no, those are incredible books.
Yeah.
I mean, I and again, it's something I'd never read that on my own. I read that assigned in my master's program because I don't like superheroes. Even a dark take on superheroes.
Sure.
I'm like, to me, there's something like reactionary about the whole concept.
Sure.
That there's going to be a Superman who's going to come fix everything.
Yeah. I mean, that's literally the text of Watchmen.
It's a critique.
It's not.
It's a critique of it, but it also contains it still too. So I was hostile even to the genre of like parody of it too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy, you know, because Zack Snyder made that Watchmen movie, and he literally adapted Watchmen rather than understanding what it was about, and so he made it sexy. The superheroes, you know, like they jump out of planes and they land in their poses, and it's like that's not you missed it, dude. You totally missed the point of this thing.
The show, they did a show, and I loved the show, which is its own thing.
Yeah.
And then it got canceled because it was too good.
Yeah. No, I mean,
you shouldn't watch this. It's too good.
I actually think that the showrunner did his season and went, and I've said all that I can say. Let's not ever do anymore. It was his choice, his landing. It was not canceled. He was like, that's my story.
Okay.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah. No, I thought it was great.
Yeah. So you spend a good amount of time thinking about that page turn.
Oh yeah. Very much. Yeah. And I, you know, again, it was like a thing of like, that's something I have always admired in the comic artists that I like. Seth is a great example. I mean, I learned a lot from reading Seth. You know, if you guys have read Seth or his, you know,
It's a Good Life If You Don't Weaken.
It's a Good Life If You Don't Weaken
Fans,
is fantastic. But even the later things, a couple of later books, and they're fantastic.
Yeah. They certainly are. Was it a big jump for you? Because prior to that, you'd only done 2 pages, right? Yeah. 2 pages, there's no page turn.
That's true.
Right? Like that's a tool you didn't have before.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you're using this tool.
Yeah. It felt great. I was really enjoying that aspect of like, wow, I get a page turn. Cool. Yeah. But it definitely was, you know, one thing I hadn't realized was page management was going to be an issue too. Wow.
In what way particularly?
Well, I sometimes lost pages because I don't know where they went. I guess I accidentally recycled things that I thought, page management, like you've got to have them ability. Finally, I realized I went online and found giant magnets boards and put up giant magnet boards so I could go put my panel pages as I was working on them and see them all at once. And that's how I did it. But before that, I had these sort of loosely floating sheets of paper lying around, and I was losing them or getting confused about what order they went in or losing track of my thought, my process. Yeah. So once I had that really, really helped to be able to see it. And then also, as I would finish an inked page, I'd put it up there so I could be like, okay, dopamine hit. Yeah. Because you got to like feed yourself with a little dopamine.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I know a couple people who have they set up strings. And the little clips.
And I've seen pictures of Chris Ware's studio, and his originals are enormous. They're like maybe 18 by 24 sheets, and he's finishing them and then putting them up on these wires. Yeah. If I had space, I would do that.
But you're working at 8.5 by 11.
Yeah. Well, for pencil, and then for inking and 11 by 17.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you
and
know
a hand letter? I hand letter
be...
too for that reason that we talked about before. That I feel like that the hand quality is part of the comic. I sort of developed this idea from Meows from years ago, reading Meows, and then as I was learning more about Meows, and he produced a book called Meows, where he revealed more of his process. And you know, his earlier versions, he did like chapters of that book that are done in a more traditional. He's actually an excellent cartoonist, very highly skilled cartoonist. And there are pages that look way more Disney. The mice look more Disney. The cats look more like illustrated, and they're drawn large and reduced in a traditional illustration style. But he found that his sketches were more powerful. And so for the final book, that book is done on a 1-to-1 scale. He drew all those pages for Mouse at that scale, which is why they have that rough-hewn quality, an awkward quality where you really can see him really trying to cram things into each panel.
Yeah.
And what that does, it creates an intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
The book has an intimacy where you almost feel as if you have discovered somebody's journal.
Yeah.
And you're sort of like intimately reading his brain, his journal, or in a way he's recreated his mother's journal that was lost.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really thought about that, and that's one reason why I insist on hand lettering, even though it costs me a lot of time. I feel that it gives that quality. I want somebody to feel like they just don't read my journals if you ever are at my house, but I do want people to feel like they've read my journal.
Yeah. No, and it works very well. That connection to the art, to the line work with the lettering. Your handwriting is incredibly neat, though, I have to say.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. Did it take you a while to be able to find the right balance?
No, that was easy. That was easy. I mean, the only thing that was hard, actually, so one thing when I first started doing comics, that the scale of writing, because I had to, I was drawing larger and shrinking down.
Mm-hmm.
That meant my handwriting had to be larger, but then I would be like, how much larger? And I'd have inconsistency. And you see inconsistency in this book in terms of what would be the point size of the text. Sometimes it's huge. Yeah. Sometimes it's a little smaller. And so that is a little harder to navigate. That's still a challenge. Yeah. When you're hand lettering, to make sure there's a consistency. Yeah. And graphic design, I'm like, it must be consistent. Yeah.
Did you know that the book would be in this format?
I was kind of hoping it would be 6x9. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, or that size book. I didn't want anything too large. I do love larger comics, but for this book, I wanted it to be smaller. I wanted more something that would fit just a book size, whatever book size is, as opposed to like there's Dan Clow's Monica.
Yep.
Which is a great book.
Yep.
It's a little larger. He designed it to be big, just it's a different way of thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. When you work on you're going chapter by chapter, I'm assuming, as you're working?
Mostly.
Yeah.
But it was done out of order.
Okay.
It was done out of order. It was chapter 2, then chapter 10, it didn't out of order.
Do you go through and do your layouts all at once, and then do your pencils all at once, then your ink?
No. Yeah. So each page is like I'm working on a spread. We're going to be working on a spread. Yep. There'd be a little thumbnail of what that's supposed to look like, and then I would break that into the pages. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
How long would you say it took you to thumbnail out the book?
Oh, I couldn't say. Honestly, I couldn't. I have no idea about time.
Okay.
Yeah, I always had that difficult. I still have that difficulty. I have a day job too, where I have a creative director with a nonprofit called the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And, my clients or my coworkers will ask me, how long will it take you to create this? I have no idea. Time has no meaning. Like 10 hours. I don't know.
I guess part of my question, are you doing like a page a day? Is it taking longer? Like once you're into the actual production of it, as opposed to the sort of the conceptualization of it?
Yes. A page a day seems fair.
Yeah.
I could do a page. I could pencil a page a day.
Yeah.
If I was lucky.
Yeah.
But then there would be all that work before that. So I wouldn't know. How long does it take? So for scheduling my next book, I will have to pull some idea out of my ass. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Publisher's going to say, how long will it take you to create this book? I'll be like, 6 months. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it took you 3 years for the first one. Hopefully it won't take anything like that.
I was hoping for a year and a half.
Yeah. Do you already have an idea for the next book? Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of ideas. One is I've talked a lot tonight about ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to do a book about life with ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know exactly what it would look like. I wouldn't want it to be too much of a science presentation.
Yeah.
But I would also want it to be accurate. So that's a little tricky because that means I'd have to read a bunch of books. Luckily, my partner is a therapist.
Yeah.
So she could explain to me how ADD works and I can put it into a comic. And then I'm still interested in this idea of ordinary trauma that we're all carrying around. That's what I call it. It's just like you're living a life. You got beat up when you were a kid because you lived in a tough neighborhood. Or, in my case, another ordinary trauma I have is my parents died. Like everybody goes through this. It's the most boring, banal thing in the world. But it happens to you and you're like, my parents died. Oh my God. This is like what? You mean my parents can die?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I want to do a book about that too.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents died in 2 very different ways. Like my mother died from dementia. So that's like a long, slow, bye. okay, I think you're dead. No, you're still alive, you know? And then my dad was like, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine. Oh my God, I'm dying. You know? So I have this great asymmetry in my personal family. And then another treasured member of my family saw what happened to my parents and was like, yeah, I'm turning 80 this year, so I'm going to commit suicide. Does anybody want to see me? And, you know,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I was like, oh, there's a book there.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that.
Yeah.
I can see that. Just a little more on craft. So if you can pencil a page a day, what about the inking? Does the inking take you substantially longer, or because you know I've met people who work both ways, right? Like that the penciling is the really hard part, and then the inking is just you turn off your brain and you just ink. And other people who are like, no, I sweat the inking. The inking takes me all the time in the world.
That's a really good question. Yeah, and I'd say it's a little bit of both. There's some pages I really did feel like when it got to the inking, I was like, now the hard work begins, or like, this is really much harder. I thought it seemed so easy in the pencil. Oh, I'll just have some detail back here, some plants. And I'm like, no, plants. Cars. Oh, there'll be some cars in the distance. I like to draw a car. And so sometimes the inking was harder in that way, but mostly it's what you said, the hard work is the pencil, breaking it down. And then when it gets to inking, it's a little bit more like downhill.
Yeah.
It feels a little bit like when you go on a bike ride and you get to the top of Twin Peaks and you're all exhausted and then you get to ride down. It's great.
How about the lettering? Do you do the lettering? Because again, everybody does it slightly differently. Do you do the letter? Do you do pencil, letter, ink?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, do you mean I do the lettering before inking?
Yeah.
No, I stupidly leave the lettering to last.
Okay.
That was a bad mistake because then sometimes it didn't fit.
Yeah.
Yes, and so I would be, but luckily I'm a Photoshop expert, so I just go in there and move shit around.
Okay.
Using my incredible Photoshop skills.
Yeah. So you're trying to stay as physical as possible, but there's definitely a digital step.
Oh, there's definitely a digital step, and that is another thing I learned from my illustration career. Was I was always trying to maintain the aspect of like how could I get the power of digital work, the speed of it, and the ease of that production method, and also how it goes to print so easily, but not get that horrible clean quality you get from digital.
Yeah.
You know, things that just like so perfect.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like digital art is like you know what a clean room is? Where like, where like there's this room you go in and it's perfectly sterile and clean. There's like no dust.
No dust. Yeah.
There's no dust. There's no bacteria. You shouldn't even sneeze in there. And I feel like the computer is that world. I spend a lot of time in that world for my day job. And then when it comes to making art, I want it to have a hand. I want it to be messy. I want it to have the rough hewn, intimate quality of a drawing.
Yeah.
But then I still want it to be to do digital. Well, to do another layer of color that you're going to do digitally because you know who wants to use paint for a comic? I mean, people do it.
People do it.
People are crazy. So I'm going to do the color digitally, you know, and that's how I do it. I would scan it, move the things around, make sure the speech bubbles aren't too crowded, and then I go in and add my second layer of color. Yeah.
Second layer of color. So you do an earlier layer.
Well, no, I mean there's a black and white,
and
then there's a layer of color, and then there's often like a couple of color layers because so you know in Photoshop there's like multiply mode and then there's screen mode.
Okay.
A lot of people don't know about screen mode. So if anybody here is a comic artist, mess with the screen mode. Put color on a layer on screen, and it will turn your black lines to whatever that color is. So I just do that. It's like one layer for multiply, one for screen. It's the most basic. I mean, I use it's true that I am a Photoshop expert. Like I teach Photoshop sometimes, but the methods that I use in my own work, I teach on the first day of Photoshop class. Like it's like Photoshop 101. Yeah.
Did you have the color theory of the book from the beginning?
From the beginning. Yeah, that was the concept. It's going to be a black and white with one other color, mostly blue, and then I'll use red for the scary parts.
Yeah,
because I thought red is like scary. Yeah.
No, it is.
It is a scary color.
Yeah. And how much messing like with filters and brushes and stuff like that?
Brushes and stuff. Yeah. Well, so here, there's a page you have right here. I mean, you see this page here. You know, there's a texture behind this blue. Yeah. I do that in Procreate with a brush. Yeah. You know.
Okay.
Oh my God, the simplest thing. keep it simple. I sometimes I think a lot of times people are making art and they think, and I've seen this with when I've taught. I'll have a student and they have big dreams for their project and they think like, I'm going to get a computer and the latest brushes and that's going to make it really good. No, it doesn't. That's not what makes art good. You make the art good. If it doesn't sing as a thumbnail, it's not going to work when you make it fancy. So
does this understanding come out of your day job?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Graphic design, everybody should just do graphic design because it's a way you will learn how to boil it down, take out everything that's superfluous, get it down to the core, and then build up again from there. Yeah. It's a very, very powerful mind method to look at the world as a graphic designer. Unfortunately, then you also end up looking at the things going like, that typeface is terrible. It's like a total curse. I can't even go see a movie anymore. They used to have beautiful typography in the movies, and currently movies have terrible typography. Any graphic designer will tell you, I can't buy a bottle of wine because the labels are all ugly, So there's a bad side to being a graphic designer, but there's a very good side, which is I feel it brings a certain clarity and simplicity to your understanding of things. Yeah.
And I'm assuming that the coloring was a relatively speedy process that you could do 2 or 3 or 4 pages a day.
That's downhill. Doing the color work was downhill. So fun. Save that for last to get the dopamine hits. Yeah. But then I did also find you can't overdose on dopamine. Don't dose your dopamine little bits, because if you do it all at once, then your brain will crash and you won't want to work on your pencil pages. So.
Yeah. Well, it depends on the creator too, Right. I was talking to Klaus about, not Monica, the one before that, why my Patience. And he told me that he did Patience. He literally started at page 1 and penciled it all the way through from page 1 to page 400. Then he went back to page 1 and started lettering it from 1 to 400. Then he started inking it from 1 to 400, and then he colored it from 1 to 4. And I'm like, how can you do that? I mean,
that's
how
crazy.
how do you not lose interest at page 300?
But then we know from his work that he's insane.
Yes, well,
so
that's
true, probably what that is.
Yeah.
But he also, I ran into him. Sometimes I see him in a cafe that I go to sometimes, and I was like, "Hi, Mr. Klaus, I'm a fan." He's like the most normal person. So he gets it all out in his work.
Yeah. He's really approachable too, I think.
Oh, he's so friendly.
Yeah.
He was so nice. Yeah. You're like having this awkward. I have this friend. Can I tell you a story of this? Okay. So I have this friend. Some of you guys here might know who I'm speaking of, who was a San Francisco radical subversive weirdo, kind of famous. And he went by the name Nestor Makhno.
Okay.
But he had a real name, which I won't say. Mm-hmm. But his anarchist name was Nestor Makhno, and he used to put up these flyers. And this guy just did nothing. I never had a job. I don't know how he lived in the Mission, but he lived in the Mission, and he would always just be walking around. And so we became friends because I would always walk around the Mission too. And he's really interesting, smart guy. And we'd have these really interesting conversations. But we'd be going on walks, and he'd just be sitting there thinking about how rotten the world is, how stupid people are, how terrible our systems of government and economy, just people's culture, just seething with a resentment and a disgust at everything before him, including me. I mean, he eventually dumped me as a friend because I'm disgusting. And but this guy was just such a character, and I was friends with him because of this. He's just a fascinating, brilliant, miserable person.
Yeah.
And exactly like a Klaus character, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Isn't that who his characters are, like Wilson or, any of them. Yeah. There are all these miserable white dudes who walk around like with incredible articulation. So my friend was incredibly articulate as well. And but the weird thing, this guy looked exactly like Dan Klaus. Like if you saw him from, right, Russell? This dude looks just like Dan Klaus. If you saw him from across the room, you would be it's Nestor, So
interesting.
Yeah. And so I ran into Klaus at this cafe. I start trying to tell him the story, and I get partway through. I'm like, I got it. I'm sorry. Okay, I got to go. Bye. But he's very politely going, oh, that sounds fascinating.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting to me that I find that most men in particular start getting more and more and more calcified as they get older. more and more rigid. They get more and more kind of locked into one thing. And this is one of the things but it's one of the things I like about the book is that it shows change, right? Like it shows growth and change, that you're confronting things that were really, really hard for you to deal with, and you came out the other side. And I don't know that I've ever read a comic that was a better endorsement of therapy.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. And that was one of the reasons why I would think therapy is a wonderful, magical thing. I don't do it myself anymore. Other people should do it, but it's great. It's great. My partner's a therapist, and so you can work with her if you want.
I guess I could ask a question: is it hard living with the therapist? But I think I'll leave.
No,
that
but there's a scene in my book. There's a scene in my book that is sort of where my therapist's partner is an off-screen character, which isn't. I mean, I have no idea. I don't think his partner was ever around during our sessions, but I put that in there because that's my life now. It's like I'm always like turning on the noise machine so that she can have her sessions privately.
Yeah. So one of the last things I want to ask you about the book is the notion that, I mean, spoiler alert, the murderer is eventually caught
or identified.
Yes, and it's through stuff that I would think in your day job is one of the things that EFF is kind of like trying to. Right? Like, So there's a real conflict for you, kind of personally.
Well, no, that's interesting. So mostly, I have this wonderful day job. Like I said, working for this incredible nonprofit where we're currently suing the government over Doge and their privacy violations. I mean, this is like I get to go to work every day and fight Elon Musk. I mean, what? Like, it's incredible. But I don't agree with my coworkers about everything. I don't agree with my organization about every single thing. And there is an objection that EFF has to this use of these databases as a de facto way for the government to have access to all of our DNA. And I can't remember if there are laws against this, but the government does not control a database of everybody's DNA. And that is, I believe, because groups like EFF have fought against that for so long. It's just a very bad idea. But what we've now done is we've said, there are giant databases of everybody's DNA that are controlled by private companies. When the government wants that information, all they need is a warrant or maybe even just a court order, they can go get it, right? And so that is we've slipped accidentally into this world in which we're all exposed all the time. In my case, it had a very positive effect.
Yeah.
And many other people, I've encountered a few people through doing this book who have had a similar story, that a murderer was identified because this method is becoming more and more common.
Yeah.
And there is something I was surprised by this, how important it was for me to have a name to put on this guy. Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
I don't know why that was.
I don't think it's weird at all. I think it's absolutely normal and human that you want to understand it, and you understand things by naming.
Yes. And you want the closure.
Yeah.
You want the closure. People want closure.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that a lot of people, when I have objections to people having their weird conspiracy theories or, projecting that maybe the husband in this case had been a murderer, it was because they didn't have closure. They couldn't say who it was. And we need closure. It's really, really important for us to be able to have an answer. And sometimes you can't have an answer. Sometimes you don't. But when you can have one, it's very important.
Yeah. So is this something that you now, I don't know, debate at work with your coworkers, or?
Oh, no, they know never to debate with me.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I'm just, because there's a dichotomy between your work and your own human thing.
Yeah. I know. Yeah. But that's kind of normal. I mean, can you imagine working at the ACLU? At least I don't work at the ACLU. They defend Nazis.
Yeah.
One thing about, I've been an activist my whole life. So it's not new to me to be working politically. Yeah. In fact, that was what drew me to this thing. I started working there. They advertised for a job. The title was designer/activist. I was like, oh, that's me. That's what I do already. That's what I'm doing. And in activism, any kind of political work that you do, you really very quickly have to set aside this idea that we're all on the same page. We're heading in the same direction, on this project. but we don't all agree on everything. And if everything's a coalition, and within the coalition that it supports are many people that I very strongly disagree with. There are many like techno-libertarians that are big funders of the organization where I work, and I may agree with them on certain issues, not on others. And that is actually the heart of politics.
Yeah.
That you have to find a way to work with people that you don't always agree with, and work on the things that you do agree with, and disagree on where you don't. Or in another case, with the tech companies. So, EFF will sometimes be like, good job, Apple, by refusing to give up, your customers' privacy to the government when they come knocking. You will not build a backdoor into your encryption. Good for you, Apple. We stand with you. Another moment, Apple is like, we built a very nice walled garden and you can't have the code.
Right.
And we're going to control all of your software and your hardware, and we won't sell you a book. We'll sort of license your right to display it on an approved device. And we very strongly disagree with that and criticize them there. So that's just, that is literally politics. And I think we're all in a moment now where we're having to become more political. All of us, everybody here has to be an activist now. Sorry, bad news.
For sure.
Yeah.
It feels like once it was all simpler. I'm sure it was never
simple. It was never simple.
Right? But it feels like it was, right?
Yes. And is that because the digital world is absorbing everything?
Yeah.
Is that why?
I think so.
I think it's like the digital world, which at one time seemed like it was contained inside our devices. It's now everywhere in us. I mean, this is a digital is instantly going onto the internet, and many stores are tracking their people. You walk in a store and they have a little secret tracker that says like, oh, I see what your social media profile is. And, eventually they'll be able to be like, oh, you are a high earner. So you're a low earner, more likely, right? Those people don't get any attention.
And even how long someone spends in a particular rack or looking at a particular thing, or where your eyes go. Like there's a lot of scary implications in so much stuff. And, I mean, to me, the scariest part is just as we say, the enshittification of that, where people are more concerned about how they can monetize us than actually doing something that's better for us. Right. That's why I love living in a world of print and real things.
I like the world of real things. I want people to be able to read my book digitally if they want to, but it's much more about, you've got to be able to smell a comic book.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. Well, and I also think that, to go back to what you were saying about the frame and the boundaries, I mean, I think that is a
you don't get that digitally
of the comic, right? Like taking in that whole page. The page is the unit. The panel is not the unit. You can break a comic into panels.
Yes.
But the page is actually the unit. Yes. So cool. Well, I think I asked most of my stuff, so I want to turn to y'all in the audience. Does anybody have any questions for Hugh here?
So you said you took 3 years to do the book. Was there ever any time during that process where you kind of like got to a page and said, I know I wrote it this way, but I can't do it this way?
Yeah.
Like, did you find it yourself doing a lot of rewriting as you went?
Oh, definitely. Yes. Many times. Yeah. And I'm trying to think of can I see that book? When would be a good example of that? I mean, some of these chapters just came right out exactly how I had them in my head, and I thought, I'll pencil it, and it came right out. So there's a chapter here about my high school reunion. It's called Go Wildcats, and I am at my high school reunion, going and talking to my former friends, people I haven't seen for 30 years, and that came out really, really easily. The chapter that's called The Black Hole. So this chapter, I have myself encountering this sort of black hole, metaphorical black hole. I had to draw these over and over and over again. I could not get that black hole to look right. I couldn't get the figures interacting with it correctly. I'd be like, I would have planned for many times for a scene to exist in a single panel and on a 9-panel grid. But no, it's not. It won't fit. I can't say what I need to say in that panel. Well, that means all the panels before it need to get scrapped and reorganized, and all the time I had to do that. And then sometimes I've drawn it so nicely in one panel, and now I have to expand it into a wide panel. But in my head, originally it was a vertical, and now I had to make it a horizontal, and it's all ruined. All that work is lost. Is there some way I can save it? I'll try to save it. I know. I'll Photoshop it and stitch it together. It doesn't work. Got to redraw it. It's just all the time. That's doing comics.
Yeah.
That's just, there's no way around it. It's like, it's so inconvenient.
Yeah. And time consuming.
Persnickety.
Persnickety. Yeah, that's a good word.
Persnickety. All these, and it's, if you have ADHD, it's even worse. I'm so self-pitying about this. These little pieces, scraps of paper and Post-it notes, and oh my God, I can't even, it's terrible.
Yeah.
No one should do it.
No, that's not true. Everybody should do it.
Everybody should, but
if they didn't, I'd be in a
they have my
store full of blank
sympathies.
pages.
They have my sympathies when they do.
Yeah, I hear that. Do you have a follow-up, Joe?
No.
No. Okay.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Please.
One of the bits from the comic that really resonated with me was your character. You're talking about masculinity and struggling with masculinity. I was curious if that part of the story was resolved or gained new thoughts and new perspectives with the solving of the murder or the identification of the murder. If that has resolved in different ways than yourself.
Oh, that's a good question. No, I wouldn't say that information about him made me feel it, but it did. The information about the murderer did shine a light. It was like a little light went on, and it was the actual final straw that made me go, I need to make a book about this, because I could see the arc of the narrative and how it tied the story up in my head. I had been sort of playing around with the idea of doing a book, but then that happened. And that was in 2018 or 19. And I was like, oh, now I've really got to do this book. But one thing I would say too, though, is that I didn't really set out to do a chapter about masculinity, and it just sort of emerged. It just sort of spilled out. I was like, oh, no, because that's right. So it was almost like that was work that I didn't do in therapy. That was work I did, therapeutic work I did in the process of doing the book, which was interesting.
Yeah.
It was interesting to me, you know. And I wanted to give that chapter, I wanted to give credit to my mom in a way. I felt like the book is a criticism of my parents for sucking so bad at parenting that they didn't get me therapy. But then I wanted to give my mom credit for, wow, she actually did a really good job of like, you know, kind of gently prodding me to shift my thinking about these things, about feminism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, parenting, I think, was a lot harder than it is now.
I don't know. I have no idea. Why would anybody have a child? That's crazy.
Because they're awesome.
Well, they are. There's a kid here. I saw a child in the back. How you doing, Jack? Hey, the best people.
They are, until they grow up.
Well, the weird thing is realizing that there's really actually are no grown-ups. You know, that was a strange thing for me to realize when I was in my 20s. Like, oh, there's no grown-ups. Yeah. They're just children that got bigger.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And some of us get to hold on to
it. And then they have the nuclear codes or whatever. You know, like you're just like, this is crazy. Yeah. But that's the world. Anyway, any other questions?
Anyone?
Did the experience put you off of the idea of ever doing another one, or is this like one and done?
Oh no, I want to do more. Yeah, I want to do more. Yeah, because I'm a masochist.
Well, also, once you start building up those muscles, right? Like, then you've got to use them.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm sort of like a really skinny superhero.
Yeah, I'm sure that before you started this, you didn't know half of what you know about comics.
No, that's absolutely true. Yes.
Right?
Yes. And so the process of now, and it's also kind of ruined reading comics for me now, because I look at them and I'm like, oh, I see what you did there. You know, I'm like reading them and I'm like analyzing how they do it. You know, I have to read it once to get the story and then go back and examine like, oh, I see.
Mm-hmm.
You just alluded to the story and then you drew it in the picture. I mean, that's a big part of comics, is it's not in the text, you know, it's in the picture and the correspondence, the balance between the pictures and the comics. Yeah.
Yep. No, that's the magic of comics.
That's where it is. Right. And I think a lot of times, many times people start doing comics and they've written it all in advance, the screenplay mode, and it's a text document and it needs to get shattered and turned into an image, half image, 75% image.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I talk to cartoonists who talk about that screenplay mode, and they're the people who I just don't understand. Yeah. Like how, but you've made it rigid by doing this, and comics are about fluidity.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, it works, but
it works. But and then I think there may also be a thing that happens when you get, you know, like they would say, like Mozart would just like could visualize the whole the whole piece in his head all at once, you know. And maybe when you've done it a bunch, you know, over and over again, it's almost like your brain already just works that way. I mean, these guys, the Hernandez brothers, right? That's how they work. I mean, they just start at the beginning and go.
Yeah.
And see where it takes them.
Yep.
But they're so fluid. They've been doing it their whole lives, decades, 40 years. These guys have been making these comics. More than that, I think.
They're at 50. I think.
They're 50 years now. It's an incredible achievement.
Yeah.
And that's how their brain works.
Yeah.
They dream in comics.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't dream in comics yet. Yeah.
Yeah, keep doing it. You might though. All right. Any last questions from anyone? Yeah, please.
Not like I haven't had opportunity to ask.
Hello?
But I
No, really. I mean, really nail them on this one. Come on.
Where did you put that blanket? As I'm listening to, I was there for the process and certainly watching this amazing growth as an artist and as a human being that was just a real treasure. And it's interesting too to listen to you talk about some of the areas, some of the pieces that were more difficult were also some of the pieces like how do I draw the black hole? How do I relate to the black hole metaphorically and literally in my material? I feel like those two processes are so distinctly both symbolic and literal.
Yeah.
And I was curious too. I hadn't really thought about it that way. Like some of the harder pieces or the harder chapters or the harder aspects of writing it, how often did you find that it was also linked to how hard
it was emotionally?
Yeah.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I think probably most of the time.
Right.
So maybe that chapter about my high school reunion is a little easier formally. It was easy to do formally because also emotionally it was easy.
Right.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that. So I do think that that's the case. But then also sometimes it's just hard to draw a car. I mean, I'm an illustrator. I've been an illustrator for 30 years. Every time I have to draw a car, I have a panic attack.
They are the worst.
It is literally the worst thing to draw. It's like machinery, but then it's all like at least a machine. I'd rather draw a motorcycle, but cars are just so. What's the edge of it? Where does it start or begin? It's all reflective.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
You said and that really was an excellent question, by the way. You should be doing it.
Yeah.
You say you've got a couple of ideas for a couple of different books. Have you started work on any of them, or are you still in the formulation stage?
I just sit around ruminating on them. Yeah, when I go for walks, my brain just cycles through it, and I think, oh, that's going to be a good beat. That's a good beat. That's story point. And I start taking notes, start writing. I have a text document where I put things into. But I really haven't. My next thing that I want to do is a self-published collection of shorter works.
Okay.
So I take a bunch of those 2-pagers that I've done over the years and put them all together. Yeah.
Nice. I, given that this is your first long work and how strong it is, I really have to say I cannot wait to see where you end up as a cartoonist, like at book 5.
Right.
Because if you're this good now,
I mean, I'm this good at 55. Imagine how good I'll be at 60.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I think so. I think that doing a work like this, not just the craft, but the emotional work of it is such a heavy lift, and you pulled it off in a really spectacular way. And I think you've got good things coming, kid.
Thank you. That's so kind of you to say. I really do appreciate it.
But it's really sincere. I'm not just blowing smoke. I truly think that. So I cannot wait to see what the next thing will be. All right. Well, then let me wrap this up with, much like the first question, which I do in everything. I have a similar last question. And that is that as you know, we've been doing this. I've been doing these interviews for almost 10 years now, 2 a month. That's 240. So we've got a lot of people who watch this series of interviews who want to make comics themselves.
Oh, nice.
And who are like, but I'm not good enough. And I don't know that I can do it, or I don't know that my emotional truth is true enough or emotional enough or whatever. And they're scared, So what might be the advice that you would give someone who thinks they have a story inside of them, but doesn't know where to start, or if they should start, or if anyone will even like them once they started?
Oh, well, I'm glad you asked that, because, I meant to bring this today, but I didn't bring. I have a self-published book, little mini comic called Making Friends with Monkey. And I can share that with anybody. If they want to write to me, find me through my website, I can sell you a copy. And it describes that very question of how to develop your creative mind. And I kind of project my concept of a creative mind as a little monkey. that you need to become friends with. And the thing about that monkey is he's incredibly creative, and everybody has one in your brain. You think you're not creative at all. But what my belief is that when you go to sleep, every single, even the most boring person in the world, like take an accountant, somebody who just works with numbers all day, that person, when they go to sleep, they have fantastical dreams, right? So it's in there. There's a little, and I project it, I imagine that it's a little monkey. That's like a master film director. That's a creative genius that's inside your brain and projecting these little dreams at you while you sleep. And then when you wake up, he goes and hides, right? So how do you make friends with that monkey when you're awake? And that's the creative process of how to tap into the creative mind that is just there. It is there. It is part of your basic cable of being a human being. If you're out here walking around, you can have a conversation and you dream. You have a creative genius inside your brain, and you just need to find it, get friends with him. But the thing is that he will hide. And the little monkey, if you get angry with him, right? You know, you ask the monkey to give you some sketches, and he gives you a bunch of crap. You know, and you're like, bad monkey, fuck you, you know? And the monkey's like, all right, see ya, I'm out. Like, he's like not coming back for a while, but then he will come back, you know? But you have to kind of set the food out for him, you know? And you got to give him a little fun task that he wants to do. He will come do the fun task and then go away, come back. And maybe if you call to him and feed him at the same time every day, you know, he will show up on a more regular basis, and he will give you access to these wonders that are inside your brain. They're just locked up. So that's, I think, probably the best answer I can give to that. But the way you frame your question, there's a lot of different problems there. There's sure. Maybe somebody might have technical problems or self-esteem problems, or they may have concept problems or whatever. Those will all solve themselves with regular work. Like show up. 90% of the job is showing up, and just keep showing up, and it'll happen. And the last thing on that is, like, everybody does not need to be the genius, you know, the greatest artist ever. You know, you don't have to be like, I play guitar. I'll never be a great guitarist. I'm just not going to put the time in. I didn't keep doing it young enough, but I love it. It feeds me. It's very, very fulfilling. And if you do any creative pursuit, it will feed you and enrich your life immeasurably. If you're bored or depressed or sad or unhappy in any way, be creative. Just do something creative on a regular basis, and you will feel better. It's the solution. It's almost as good as therapy, you know. And so it's there for you. It's like I said, it is part of your basic cable as a human being that got born with a brain. And the fact that we are cut off from that, or don't feel like we have access to that, that's the criminal society that we live in that has crushed it out of us through our education system, through our entertainment system that's constantly showing you, you know, like, oh, what music is this incredibly overproduced thing that I don't even know how they make those sounds, you know, and it sounds good a lot of the time, but it's like way beyond anything I could ever produce or create. It's totally opaque to me. How is a movie made? I don't know, but start small. You do the little things, and then it comes, and it's there. It's part of the basic cable.
Yeah, I've been asking that question probably 250 times. I think that might be the best answer I've heard on that whatsoever.
Well, will you carry my monkey book on consignment? Sure, of course. Okay, great.
1000%. That's easy peasy. Cool. All right. I got a little bit of housekeeping to do here just for a second. Bear with me. I have some thanks I want to make. I want to thank Jordan, my producer, who does a bunch of stuff that none of you get to see, but I could not have a show if Jordan didn't do it. I want to thank Ben over there, who was running the show, and again, you're not seeing it now, but he was, moving the camera around and doing stuff, and could not do it without you, my friend. I want to thank my staff. I want to thank Kat and Katie and Chrissy and Max because they let me get away with doing this, right? Like I could not be able to sit and interview people about making comics if it weren't for them doing all the work in the store, honestly. So thank them all very much. I want to thank all of you people at home who are watching these shows, who are members of the club. That level of eyeball support and financial support allows us to keep going with this. So you are all really awesome, and I want to thank people like you, because if it wasn't if you didn't make books, if the people who make all the comics didn't make them, I would be sitting in a store full of blank paper, which would really fucking suck. I don't want to run a stationery store. I want to run a store full of dreams and imagination and thoughts and emotion. And I get to do it because of you. So thank you so much for that.
My pleasure. Thank
I really appreciate that. If you're sitting at home and you want something to read, you don't know, what to buy, get a copy of this. You can buy it from us. There's a thing on the screen probably any second now. We're happy to sell you one, but I mean, dude, go to your local comic shop, get it. Go to the library and get a copy. This book will fill your brain full of good thoughts, and it will show you a lot of hope and a lot of the ability to be able to confront your fears and to move past them in a way that it really touched us all. So buy the book. Our next show for the adult club will be Raised by Ghosts. That will be next month or later in this month. Brianna Lowenstein is also local, so we will be doing another show like this. So I hope that everybody can come back for that as well. And then our kids club this month is Bring Me the Head of Susan Lomond from Silver Sprocket, a really fantastic book that shows why revenge is never the path you want to take. I think that's a great lesson for kids these days. That's what I got for you all. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for being here, my friend. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, guys.